"She's not pretty enough to be my daughter," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. My small body shrank into itself, my fingers gripping the fabric of the couch so hard I thought my knuckles might snap. My mother didn't intervene. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she whispered something to my sister and smirked as if I were some kind of joke they both shared silently, one I was never supposed to understand. From that moment, the house felt different. Every corner was charged with the memory of that day. The walls seemed to lean in, heavy with expectation, judgment, and disdain. I learned quickly that silence was my shield. I learned that if I moved too loudly, spoke too confidently, or laughed too freely, I would draw attention to my wrongness, my supposed ugliness, my imperfection. My sister, radiant and flawless, was the one they celebrated. I was the shadow trailing behind her, the mistake they had to live with. The humiliation became routine. At family gatherings he would lean in close, his voice low but deliberate, just loud enough for others to hear. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Or, "Stop making that face. You're not beautiful enough for people to look at you." Each word hit like a hammer against glass inside my chest. And my mother. She never comforted me. She mocked me. She would tilt her head, eyes narrowing, lips curling into that familiar half-smile, and whisper, "You're not even really part of this family. Maybe you're a stranger." I wanted to run, to disappear entirely, but where could I go? This house was my prison. I grew older, and the psychological abuse grew more refined. My father's jabs became subtle, insidious. In front of teachers, neighbors, or even friends, he would toss a comment that sounded casual but left me flinching for hours. "I don't know why she tries. She's not like her sister." I would feel the stares of the adults, feel the unspoken agreement that something about me was wrong. My mother would smile, always complicit, turning every minor misstep into a spectacle of ridicule. I became a master of pretending, of masking my emotions. But inside, I was a storm, gathering anger, confusion, and despair. School was no refuge. I had learned from a young age that words could wound more than fists, and that the sharpest blade was the one you never saw coming. I became quiet, invisible, meticulous. Every mistake I made felt magnified by the echoes of my parents' voices. Yet, even in my quietest moments, I noticed things. The way my sister's laughter filled the house while mine seemed to vanish. The way my father's eyes lit up when he complimented her but clouded over when he glanced at me. The way my mother's hands would brush against hers, but never mine. I began keeping a diary at 14. Not a journal, but a record, a testimony to the life I was forced to endure in silence. Every insult, every belittlement, every calculated humiliation was documented. I wrote not because I thought anyone would read it, but because I needed evidence that I was not imagining the cruelty. The pages became my companions, a quiet rebellion against a family that insisted I was less than, invisible, or even wrongfully placed in their lives. By the time I was 16, the tension in the house was almost unbearable. My father's disdain had become ritualized. Every conversation, every mealtime, every holiday was a minefield. I could see the anticipation in his eyes, the way he searched for flaws to expose. My mother, ever the accomplice, seemed to delight in my discomfort. My sister, blissfully unaware, or perhaps blissfully enjoying my torment, would flaunt her beauty, her effortless charm, and my parents would laugh, always at my expense. It was on my 16th birthday that the cruelty escalated to something almost cinematic in its horror. The house was crowded with relatives, faces I barely knew, all gathered to celebrate me, or so I thought. My father, in a display that felt choreographed, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a slow smirk playing on his lips. "I suppose we have to pretend she belongs here," he said, his voice carrying across the room like a death sentence. The laughter that followed wasn't playful. It was a cackling affirmation of my existence as a mistake, a shadow, a lesser being. My mother chimed in with her own cruel assessment, suggesting that perhaps I was adopted, a stranger in their lives. My sister laughed, the sound piercing me like shards of glass. That night, I lay in bed, the ceiling above me blank and endless, my thoughts spiraling. I hated them, not just for what they did, but for making me question my own existence. Was I really not part of this family? Was I truly a mistake? The questions burned in my chest, a constant ache that no amount of silence could soothe. I realized in that moment that I would have to find the truth for myself. And so I began planning, carefully, secretly, for the moment I would confront reality. Years passed. I went to college, where I learned to mask my pain behind smiles and casual conversation. But the shadows followed me home. Every visit to that house, every phone call from my parents, was a reminder of the humiliation I had endured. I started saving money secretly, planning for a test that could reveal the truth once and for all. DNA. A simple, clinical procedure, but one that held the power to undo years of psychological torment, to shatter the carefully constructed facade my father had built around himself. The decision to take the test was not easy. It carried risks. My parents were unpredictable, volatile. Confronting them with the truth could mean explosions, ultimatums, even threats. Yet the need to know, to finally have proof of my place, or lack thereof, in this family, overpowered every fear. I scheduled the appointment with trembling hands, feeling a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. Each day that passed before the test was a study in psychological torture. I would imagine my father's face when he learned the truth. Would he deny it? Collapse? Rage? I couldn't predict his reaction, and that uncertainty gnawed at my sanity. The night before the test, sleep eluded me entirely. I walked the streets near my apartment, the darkness pressing in from all sides, every shadow stretching like an omen. The wind whispered through the trees in a way that felt almost conspiratorial, as if the universe itself knew what was about to unfold. I thought of my father's eyes, cold and judgmental. I thought of my mother's mocking smile. I thought of my sister, radiant and untouchable, the living proof of the comparisons that had haunted me my entire life. I felt my chest tighten, my heart hammering in anticipation, fear, and a strange exhilaration. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of the test was cinematic in its tension. The hospital lobby seemed to stretch endlessly, its fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. Every sound, the click of shoes on tile, the murmur of nurses, the distant ring of a phone, felt amplified. I was hyper-aware of every detail. The smell of antiseptic, the subtle hum of the ventilation, the chill that seeped through my coat. My hands shook as I checked in, the receptionist's polite but indifferent smile doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. When I was finally called into the sterile, white room for the procedure, I could barely breathe. The nurse's presence was comforting yet clinical, her movements precise and detached. The test was over in minutes, yet it felt eternal. Every drop of blood collected was a drumbeat toward revelation, toward the moment when my entire existence, my lifelong torment, would either be justified or shattered. Walking out of the hospital, the air felt different, charged, electric. Every step I took was heavy with anticipation. I imagined the envelope arriving in the mail, the sterile paper holding the truth I had sought for decades. Each sound, footsteps on pavement, car engines, the distant bark of a dog, made me jump, my senses on high alert. I felt hunted by my own expectations, by the ghosts of humiliation that had followed me my entire life. For the next days, the weight was unbearable. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat. Every time the mail arrived, my heart leapt, then sank when it wasn't there. Shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch longer, creep closer. The walls pressed in, alive with judgment and mockery. My parents' voices haunted me, my father's sneering tone, my mother's whispering cruelty. I became obsessive, pacing, checking the mailbox multiple times a day, imagining the moment I would finally confront them, finally have the proof that had eluded me for so long. Every interaction with them during this time was unbearable. My father called, and I could hear the condescension in his voice even over the phone. My mother texted, each message carrying the subtle poison of her derision. My sister, blissfully unaware or cruelly aware, sent selfies and stories, flaunting the beauty I had been told I lacked. Each moment, each interaction, was a knife twisting deeper into the wound of anticipation. And yet, despite the torment, there was a flicker of hope, a spark of something dangerous and thrilling. The DNA test could change everything. It could dismantle the carefully constructed hierarchy of cruelty my father had maintained. It could expose truths too long buried, too long ignored. It could vindicate me. And the thought of it, the sheer intoxicating thought, kept me alive, trembling, on edge, obsessed with the approaching revelation. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, every creak and sigh a reminder of the life I had been forced to endure. Shadows moved in corners, playing tricks on my eyes, but I didn't care. I had a mission. I had a purpose. And soon, very soon, I would have the truth. The envelope, when it finally arrived, would not just contain paper. It would contain decades of humiliation, silence, doubt, and shadows. It would contain my vindication. And my father, the man who had reduced me to fear and invisibility for my entire life, would finally be confronted with the consequences of his cruelty. But until that moment, the tension was unbearable. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Every breath, a drumbeat. Every shadow, a whisper of the reckoning to come. The day the results arrived, the air itself seemed to thrum with anticipation. I woke before sunrise, unable to sleep, my heart hammering in a rhythm that matched my racing thoughts. Every shadow in my apartment felt heavier than usual, every creak of the floorboards like a drumbeat in the theater of my anxiety. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the electric dread that coursed through me. The envelope had arrived in the mail just moments ago, resting innocently on the doormat as if it held nothing more than ordinary correspondence. But I knew better. I could feel its weight in my chest before I even touched it. It was impossibly light for the decades of humiliation and doubt it carried, but that was how terror works. The heaviest burdens are often invisible until they're finally unmasked. I approached it with a deliberate slowness, my fingers brushing against the paper as if it were alive, as if it might burn me or whisper the secrets I had longed to hear. My apartment felt impossibly quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant honk of a car outside, even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall were amplified, each sound a relentless reminder that the moment of truth had arrived. I tore the envelope open, my hands trembling violently now, every nerve screaming. I pulled out the paper inside, my eyes tracing the sterile lines of text like a diver searching the dark depths of a sunken ship. And then, it hit me. The first words were clinical, almost indifferent, but they carried a weight that no human cruelty could rival. I am your biological father. The paper continued, listing the genetic markers, the statistical probabilities, and the medical validation, but my eyes skimmed over the technical jargon. My father's blood was in my veins. The man who had tormented me, belittled me, made me question my very existence. He was my father. My mother's whispers, my sister's laughter, the years of mockery, they were not the result of adoption or some stranger's mistake. They were deliberate, cruel choices, made by people who should have loved me. For a moment, I felt nothing. Shock, disbelief, a numb void that consumed every thought. Then, slowly, a tidal wave of emotions surged. Anger, rage, betrayal, each one crashing over me, threatening to pull me under. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly I thought they might crumple. I could feel my pulse in my temples, in my ears, in every trembling fiber of my being. And then came fear. Not for myself, but for what was about to happen. My father had to see this. He had to understand the truth, even if it destroyed him. The very thought of confronting him, of watching the carefully constructed arrogance in his eyes crumble, sent shivers down my spine. Yet I knew I could not wait. I had waited decades for this moment, and every second of delay was a betrayal of my own courage. I called him, my voice steadier than I felt. "You need to come to the hospital," I said. No explanation. No preamble. Just the command, the inevitability. The line went silent. I could hear his breathing on the other end, slow, cautious, suspicious. And then he hung up. Within an hour, he arrived, sleek and composed on the outside, but I could see the tension in the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes darted around, calculating. I led him to the sterile hospital room, the walls white and unfeeling, the smell of antiseptic suffocating, suffused with the weight of inevitability. The nurse, her face calm and neutral, handed him the paper. I watched him take it, his fingers brushing mine in a fleeting, meaningless connection before he opened it. The moment he saw the words, the mask cracked. First came disbelief, a frozen, paralyzed stare that held the weight of years of arrogance and control. Then came the tremor in his hands, the twitch in his jaw. I could see the gears in his mind turning, desperate, frantic, trying to rationalize, to deny, to rewrite decades of abuse. "It's impossible," he whispered, voice cracking, not with anger but with fear. His eyes scanned the page again and again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves, might conceal the truth if he stared long enough. But the truth does not bend to desire. It is immutable, unflinching, and utterly devastating. I stood there, silent, watching him unravel. My mother had followed him into the room, her expression shifting from smug curiosity to creeping horror as she realized what the paper meant. My sister, oblivious to the magnitude at first, glanced between us, confusion flickering across her face. This can't be," my father stammered, collapsing into the chair, his face ashen, eyes wide and unblinking. I raised you. He couldn't finish. The carefully maintained superiority, the arrogance, the cruel authority, it all crumbled like ash in a storm. I felt a curious mix of triumph and pity, a cold, cinematic satisfaction at seeing the architect of my suffering brought low. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet, simmering unease. This confrontation would not end here. The psychological fallout would ripple through our family like a shockwave, tearing apart the delicate structures of control and favoritism my father had built. My mother's voice, sharp and incredulous, finally broke the silence. How is this possible?" Her words trembled, not with disbelief, but with the fear of consequences she had never imagined. My sister's laughter, the sound that had haunted my childhood, was gone, replaced with stunned silence, eyes wide, searching mine for understanding, for guidance, for reassurance. I let them sit in the weight of the truth. I didn't need to speak. The paper spoke volumes. Decades of mockery, of humiliation, of psychological torment, were finally confronted with the unflinching authority of genetic fact. My father, the man who had sought to define me as less than, as a shadow, as a mistake, now faced the undeniable proof of his own failure, not in my existence, but in his cruelty. The room felt charged, every second stretching, every breath weighted with the tension of revelation. And then, finally, the first tears came, not from me, but from him. Shaking, broken, unable to maintain the facade that had defined him for decades. His collapse was complete, cinematic, almost surreal in its intensity. The very walls seemed to lean in, holding witness to the reckoning. I took a step back, feeling the long, unrelenting tension drain from my body. For decades, I had lived in shadows, in whispers, in the cruel margins of a family that refused to see me as whole. And now, the truth had been revealed. The DNA had spoken. The reckoning had begun. The hospital room, now a stage of quiet devastation, held a new kind of tension. The initial shock had settled into something far more dangerous. Denial, desperation, and the bitter sting of humiliation. My father sat slumped, his hands trembling over the paper as if it were a weapon that could erase the truth. The mask he had worn for decades, the cruel, unyielding armor of authority, was shattered. But some truths, once known, do not fade quietly. He looked up at me then, eyes wild, searching. This has to be wrong. There must be a mistake. The lab, someone mixed up the samples. I watched him closely, noting the precise way his voice trembled, not with sorrow, not with regret, but with panic. Panic is the fuel of denial. It twists the mind, warps reasoning, and turns even the most rational man into a desperate creature clawing for any illusion of control. I triple-checked, I said, my voice steady, cold, unwavering. Every step, every swab, every form. There's no mistake. This is the truth. You are my father. You've known it all along, and you chose to humiliate me anyway. He flinched as though struck, a shudder passing through his body. His jaw tightened, a reflexive armor against the truth he could not face. But denial, like a dangerous drug, courses through the veins of the guilty. He needed someone to side with him. Someone to justify the life he had built on cruelty. And my mother, ever the strategist, saw her moment. Maybe this isn't the right test, she suggested, her tone deceptively calm, soft like silk stretched over a blade. Maybe it was contaminated. Maybe you need a second opinion. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked to my father. She was trying to manipulate him back into his fortress of arrogance, back into the comfortable lie that allowed him to dominate and humiliate. But the lie had cracks now. Gaping, jagged, impossible to mend. I didn't answer immediately. I let her words hang in the air like smoke, let them settle and choke the room with their hollow falsity. My father's face contorted in conflict. Part of him wanted to believe her, to grasp at any thread that could preserve his image as the infallible patriarch. But the reality, cold and unyielding, gnawed at him. He could feel it in his veins. He knew, with every fiber of his being, that I had outmaneuvered the entire illusion he had built. Hours passed. What was meant to be a confrontation stretched into a drawn-out psychological battle. I observed every micro-expression. The twitch in his eye, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the way his fingers unconsciously clenched and unclenched. Denial is never immediate. It festers, it grows, it consumes. And as it consumed him, I felt a surge of satisfaction, a long-awaited vindication for the years of torment, the mocking laughter, the whispered, not pretty enough comments that had haunted me like a curse. But my victory wasn't in their physical collapse. It was in watching the architecture of their cruelty implode. Do you feel it? I asked softly, almost like a whisper, letting the words drip slowly into the tension-filled silence. The weight of everything you've done. The truth isn't just on that paper. It's in every memory, every insult, every cruel game you played. You built your empire on humiliation. And now, it's crumbling. My father's head jerked up, eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and fear. You don't understand. I raised you. I provided for you. You don't know what it took. I leaned forward, voice calm but icy, slicing through the room like a scalpel. I know exactly what it took. It took cruelty. It took mockery. It took shaming me in front of your friends, family, strangers. And for what? So your favorite daughter could shine while I existed in the shadows. My mother's face paled. The control she had exercised for so long, manipulating narratives, twisting truths, keeping the family in line, was slipping. She tried to speak again, tried to soothe, to redirect. Manuel, calm down. You're overreacting. I smiled, though it was not a warm smile. It was the cold, precise satisfaction of someone who had waited decades for justice. Overreacting? No. I'm finally reacting. To a lifetime of lies. To every word, every laugh. Every time I was made to feel like a stranger in my own home. My sister, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I know, I said. You didn't know. And that's exactly why you've been protected from the truth all these years. So you could feel safe, superior, while I suffered. The room was heavy now, thick with the weight of exposed cruelty. Every wall seemed to press closer, every shadow longer, as if the house itself were a participant in the judgment unfolding. Then came the final act, the psychological crescendo. My father, once the unyielding tyrant of our family, now sat trembling, eyes wide, a man stripped bare of dignity and dominance. His mind raced, futilely trying to reconstruct the lie, to reclaim his fortress of control. But the fortress was rubble. Every memory, every insult, every calculated act of cruelty was now laid bare against the immutable truth of the DNA test. I stood, walking slowly around him, letting my presence loom, letting the silence punctuate each step. "This is your reckoning," I said. "Not mine. Not anyone else's. Yours. You built your life on dominance and fear. And today, the fear turns on you." He tried to speak, tried to defend, but his words faltered, tangled in disbelief. My mother's manipulations, once so potent, had no hold here. She watched silently, realizing, perhaps too late, that the power dynamics she had carefully maintained were now utterly inverted. And I realized in that moment that my victory was not in physical confrontation, not in loud accusations, not even in tears. It was in the slow, cinematic unraveling of their certainty. It was in the psychological collapse, the tremors of guilt and panic, the knowledge that for the first time in my life, I was seen, not as the lesser daughter, not as the outsider, but as someone who could wield truth like a weapon, someone whose existence alone demanded acknowledgement and respect. The tension didn't evaporate. It lingered, a dark pulse in the room, a reminder of what had been endured, and what had been survived. I left the hospital that night knowing something fundamental had shifted. The family I had been cast out of was no longer the same. And I, for the first time, felt the raw, undeniable power of reclaiming my story. Moral lessons. This story teaches that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, has an unstoppable power to surface. Cruelty, manipulation, and favoritism within a family can leave deep scars, but vindication does not always require revenge. It can come simply from exposing lies and reclaiming your own dignity. It also highlights the dangers of obsession with control. Those who humiliate and manipulate others may build a facade of power, but it is fragile and can crumble when confronted with evidence and courage. Finally, the story reminds us that self-worth cannot be dictated by others' opinions. Standing firm in the truth and asserting your identity is the ultimate act of strength.